I want to start by saying hello to everybody and welcome to the Q&A for our program Short Stories 2, social stories that offer a fresh look at some topical issues. My name's John Stadelman. I'm a longtime volunteer with the festival, but I'm also the senior programmer now, focused on short narrative films. And I have, in the house, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the filmmakers, or at least representing the films of this program. So I want to sort of, if you wouldn't mind if I say your name, could you just like wave at your camera so people can get some sense of, I know your name pops up for some people, but maybe not for everybody, you never know. So Smiley Death Face, we have Joanna Fang, the producer. There she is.
Guys.
Okay, we have from Joe Causse with Gather in the Corner. Joe, can you wave your hand? Thank you, Joe. We have Quinn Else. Is that pronounced right, Else?
Correct, yeah.
All right, from Fort Irwin.
Hello.
All right, great. We have Tessa Hope Slovis from Pizza Party. Hi, Tessa. And we have Hao Zheng from The Chef.
Hello.
Hey, Hao. And we have Federico Matarazzo, who is the producer and distributor of My Generation. Federico.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
He's talking to us from Italy, so I think that's
yeah.
All right. Well, here's what I kind of want to do in terms of this Q&A. Generally speaking, the one thing that every audience member, when you come to these things, is going to ask you is, how'd you get the idea? How did the inception of it? And then, anything else interesting that comes along with it. So I want to kind of go through in the order that I just gave you. We'll sort of start there. And I guess, so we're starting with Smiley Death Face. And I want to make clear the hook that pulled your films together. Has anybody been able to watch all of the films in this category yet? Didn't think so. Well, you're going to get a free ticket, so I hope you do come back and watch each other's films, because that's one of the joys of a festival like this. It really is. And there's a reason you're grouped together like this, because if you're like me, you've been seeing a million short films about specific contemporary issues all the time. People are, it's almost a bandwagon from year to year. You'll see 10,000 Me Too. It just goes back and back and back. What I loved about all of your films is that you take a tangential approach to these issues, that even though they're addressed, they aren't addressed in a bald way. There's nuance, there's humor, there's a sideways glance at it, I guess. And that's what I found especially effective, because I think it makes the social points even clearer, more accessible, more engaging. So starting with Smiley Death Face, which is, absurd, bizarre, funny, a play on the trope of the horror film. And I'll tell you honestly, Joanna, I was a little concerned about programming it because our audience skews older. And for those of you who haven't seen it, you guys, all the dialogue is emojis. It's just emojis. So, and there's even a little comment about that. So the idea of communications using this sort of new social media becomes the social issue. And can you talk now about how you came up with the idea and how you worked out?
Sure. You almost even answered the question. We were just watching a lot of horror stuff, like Stranger Things. And we realized that a lot of horror stuff and thrillers are throwbacks to an era in the 70s and 80s when modern technology didn't exist.
Right.
And so we really wanted to do a film that, was fun and not too serious, but also like use modern technology, as a vehicle. And, why stop there? Let's just make the modern technology the villain altogether, go all the way there. So we wanted something that would be current, and fun and poke fun at society and where it's going now.
Did you consider the emoji issue, that it might not be accessible to everybody?
100%. Because, it's not like reading subtitles where it's just, you're just reading. To me, it'd be like kind of reading Pictionary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so is the audience going to have to think while they're going through this? Is it going to be too much thought? But you kind of get the idea. once you see the pictures.
And you're working off of, 1,000 tropes, the girl in the house alone with the phone call, kind of.
Right,
So,
taking it old school with a new
yeah.
spin, but yeah, in the script was like, a lot of it was just in emojis, like, as opposed to the traditional script with words. So,
Yeah.
So we really had to kind of like nail down the pacing and her reactions, to.
Well, you say you worked with the writer, so the writer just wrote in emojis?
Yeah. But you can tell there's also a dialogue in the beginning, as you can tell. But pretty much, yeah, we had to communicate in, police emoji and TV emoji, So it was a fun challenge.
It was just terrific. Well, I'm gonna move on to the next person, which is Joe Causse with Gather in the Corner, Joe. And Joe, this was, I think, such a spectacular short film because of its tone. This is the social issue involved in this one, guys, is guns in the schools. And you say that and you go, oh God. And you do go, oh God, when you're watching this. But at the same time, there is this wicked satirical sense of humor that's flowing through the whole thing. And I want to, Joe, if you can address that in the context of addressing how you came up with the idea and all that.
Right. Well, thank you. But yeah, I guess the idea came about when I was talking to a family member. She's a school counselor, and I was talking to her about the lockdown drill that she has to go through. And I did some research about it. And all this seemed so surreal that the kids basically this becoming their new normal for them. And then added to that, the idea floating around of arming teachers was put out. And so with all that in mind, I was thinking, how can we make a film about that without being over dramatic or also not taking it seriously? So we try to find that balance and that nuance that I think you brought up in your intro. So I think it was all about balance and creating well-intentioned characters that eventually are roped into this program they didn't choose to be part of.
The reference to the paperwork that is involved made me laugh out loud. That whole.
I mean, that's one of the things with, and that's why we chose mockumentary as well, is we wanted to be detail-oriented, and one of the reality of that situation is that there will be so much paperwork at all times. The bureaucracy of all of it would be insane, I think. So that was part of the details that we wanted to include in it.
Well, and I like the fact that you're right. The characters are all treated with respect, even the kind of buffoonish one.
Right.
There's kindness in the way that you approach them, and the kids are just great.
Yeah, they did a great job. Yeah, we try to capture various reactions and how this kind of process impact them differently. So that was the whole intent. Well,
moving on to Pizza Party to Fort Irwin with Quinn Else. Hey Quinn, there you are.
Hey.
I have to tell you, when I first watched this, I thought it had been miscategorized. I thought this belongs with the docs. This doesn't, and then I actually had to kind of reel it back and watch it again, and I realized the art that went into creating that. So if you can talk a little bit about that process. I know it had something to do with the incredible location you managed to nail down, but also finding the guy to play that role had to have been a challenge.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I took an animation class, and my teacher of the class had told me that in the mid-2000s, he worked as a role player in U.S. Army training simulations. And so I discovered the world that is Fort Irwin, and they still are running these simulations, all the time. And as any U.S. citizen can go visit and attend and watch one of these reenactments once a month. So I felt like naturally the actual reenactments are kind of a combination of incredibly realistic and cinematic elements, and then incredibly fake, like obviously fake elements. And there was a constant clash, like a very schizophrenic, terrifying clash between the super real elements and the super fake elements. So we kind of wanted the style of the film to replicate that as well. It goes from kind of more documentary style to like a very stylized Hollywood action movie style. And the hope was that that kind of reflected the actual experience of watching the simulations, which was a constant barrage of conflicting stimuli, I felt like.
But then the issue here is PTSD.
Yeah.
And you finding a vet who actually is missing, is I think I'm not remembering, missing both of his legs, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's, in Los Angeles, there's a group called Media Ability. It's like a casting agency that represents amputee actors. So there's quite a few amputee actors in Los Angeles, but they're often cast as either, like zombies in The Walking Dead or war casualties.
Oh my God.
So luckily, we actually had the opportunity to audition quite a few amputee actors. We auditioned maybe 15 or 20 people.
Oh my God.
And it became clear the more people we auditioned, it'd also be interesting to cast a veteran as well. And I think what was great about Christian is he was a very thoughtful, sensitive, quiet person. And I feel like PTSD is often represented as kind of like a very explosive, violent phenomena. But many of the people that I spoke to did suffer from PTSD, kind of described it more as just feeling afraid all the time. So the hope was kind of that Christian would give an interesting and more realistic portrayal of what having PTSD is.
You worry, you worry for him as an audience because you see that he's going into this reenactment to help, but you think this is going to push a button, that he doesn't want pushed, or that you don't want to see pushed, and it actually helps. At least that's the feeling I get at the end.
I interviewed a veteran who had kind of very directly done what Christian does in the movie. So he had lost his limb in combat, and then he participated in these reenactments. And I had the same first impulse where it's like, you would think that this is the worst thing to do for someone in this situation. But the way he described it, it was kind of like an immersion therapy that replaced his memory, his very real traumatic memory, with this kind of fake version of it over and over and again. And so kind of the like absurd elements of actually doing the reenactment, which he found very funny, helped him kind of process his triggers, later on.
Makes sense. Well, now moving on to Pizza Party with Tessa Hope Slovis. Tessa, this is just an absolutely beautiful film and so elegantly made. The issue sort of that she is addressing is this is the Me Too movement, and it's loosely based on well, maybe directly based, I'm not sure, on a gym teacher, a gymnastics teacher who abused his female students. And so, but the take you bring out on it that makes my heart sing is that you actually approach the issue of the demonization of men, in a sense. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. The sense that men are born with this kind of original sin, and that, but that maybe not is what you say. So can you address that and the idea for this?
Yeah. So this actually sprang out of a class. I was an acting student getting my master's degree at USC, and we took a on-camera acting class, and I had been listening to the Michigan radio and NPR podcast Believed, which basically was a retelling examination of the Larry Nassar trials. As you mentioned, Larry Nassar was accused, we learned later, of abusing over 153 women and girls during his time as the coach of the U.S. Gymnastics team, and also working at Michigan State. And as I was listening to this podcast, I heard this one tiny little line where they were talking about how the night before the trials began, the litigators actually threw a pizza party for the girls that were going to come in and testify.
This is
And
great.
I was astounded, and it was very much kismet. I was in this class and I wrote this piece, you know, to shoot on our tiny little budgets. And my teacher, Jean Gallerano, who actually was cast as Max and became my collaborator producer, you know, turned to me and said, "We can't make this at school. We need to make this in life. Like, we have to produce this." And I think for me, the big part of the touchstones of this piece for me is, yes, it is about survivorship and sexual assault. And as a survivor myself, I've always felt that our narratives and our representation has been incredibly one-dimensional. It's been very much grounded in the act itself and not on the individuals. And, you know, survivors can, and men and women, not only, you know, are dynamic people. We're funny. We're weird. We joke about our assaults. We don't acknowledge them. We pretend that they don't exist. We talk about them at random parts of the day. And I really wanted to encapsulate that in the film. I really wanted it to feel as disorienting and as unusual as, you know, carrying that part of your life on your back. And so that was kind of the impetus for it. And I mean, I think because so many people in the process related to it and connected to it, or at least knew someone, it ended up, you know, that the beauty of it and the poetry of it really ended up as a result of the people that were part of it.
Do something, you know, that individuality of character comes through 100% in your writing and in your directing, you know, and lifting that forward. But I also think, you know, the fact that one of the main characters is pregnant, and she talks a conversation about, I'm not worried about this. I'm going to have a boy, and I'm happy that I'm having a boy. He's going to be a good boy. That made me happy, and then the weirdness of the final shot, and you guys will have to watch this. You'll have to see the final shot, because there are little flashbacks of the adult women as children, and the final bite of pizza, the joy and the faint suggestion that maybe there's an eating disorder possibly under there. Maybe it's the weirdest feelings hitting you at once, which is something that I love in film. I love experiencing that in film. So yeah.
You got it. And I think the beauty, and to address this conversation about, which I didn't earlier, about having a son, I think about that all the time. I think about, you know, in this world, I mean, we see it every single day in the media about young men, and what, I mean, to be honest, and this film really was a wonderful processing experience too. I'm terrified to raise a son, you know, for all of the reasons that we see every day. And how do we raise, you know, how do we teach men and women the language of consent? How do we teach our children about this? And I think innocence is a big theme in there. And I think whether it's having a child, whether it's, you know, being a child, eating ferociously, I really wanted to play with the ideas of innocence, and also like kind of rubbing against being frictive with this really horrific kind of event.
Beautiful. Well, now let me move on to Hao. Hao Jung made a film called The Chef, which is, and it's how your film is a first for me as a programmer, because we do get a lot of science fiction in here, and very rarely as a genre does it work in short film. It's usually a big bump, and I think you're here because you nailed it. It's the longest film in this section. And Hao's film sort of deals with the whole idea of AI, artificial intelligence, and blends it into the whole concept of what goes on with immigration, with immigration itself. And it's a very interesting sideways take that will make you uncomfortable in ways that you're not quite able to articulate. At least that's how I feel. How can you talk about your your process and how you came to this story.
Right. So The Chef was actually one of my thesis films at AFI. And like for almost all of us, it was an extra project at AFI. So we were taking it almost like, let's crash and burn with this. Like, let's try something that people say like we shouldn't try at film school as students, especially with the sci-fi world with such limited budgets. And then so originally the idea concepts come from our producer. So the producer, who's also one of the co-writers on this, she brought up this idea about creating a story set in the futuristic world, but about, Asian American community stories. And so we started brainstorming about that, right? And, in a very interesting way, we're trying to examine, this relationship between, how as Asian, community members, we feel as a minority. But then what would it be like for, AIs in, in our community? What would they feel if they can feel? And actually, as you can see, we casted like a Caucasian, actor to play that character, and then plays him.
I wasn't sure of that. I wasn't sure whether it was mixed, but I couldn't tell.
Yeah, so he's original German, I think. And then so we casted him specifically and then put him in this Asian kitchen, pretty much putting him as the minority. We're like trying to examine those layers of, what does it really feel to be a minority in this? And I mean, to broadening it up a little bit more, it's at the end, it's always about just human connections, right? Like, despite our differences, like, we all need human connections, but then nowadays we're always, blaming technology for like separating us. But to me, like, now that I'm thinking about it, it's almost like an excuse, sure, you have phone, sure, you have internet, sure, you have social network, social, media, but then you can still approach people, right? So like, that's not an excuse. So
you humanize the AI, but at the same time, he becomes a labor threat to the other people working in the Chinese restaurant.
Right.
Yes, it had visual elements that still suggested the future, even though it was no budget. I mean, you could see how careful you had been.
Yeah, like, it was a very like, there's so many instances that could have stopped us making this film, because again, like making that world really costs money, and then we know that we're limit. That's why we're like, okay, let's set it in this more nowadays, more realistic, and we're just planting small hints of like sci-fi elements, because we don't have the resources to do those.
Well, it was terrific, and how, forgive me for jumping on to Federico, who's been so patient. Thank you, Federico, for being so patient, waiting in Italy to talk. But this particular film is an animated film, so when you see it, and I think this really is a work of art. It's breathtaking visually. It's actually part of a trilogy, which I found out doing a little more research on it, and it's about my generation in some ways. The world addressed is mostly 20th century, but it's got cartoon tropes, like big cartoon. He uses logos, attacks capitalism in a way that I just adored. Federico, talk about what you know about working with the director, whose name is Ludovic Houplain. Thank you.
So, what initially, the initial title that Ludovic gave to the film was My Revolution. But then we changed to My Generation. And this is because, as you said, this film has to be seen as a part of a trilogy that started in 2011 with Logorama. Logorama was a portrait shot of the 2010s. So the branding, the overconsumption, the ultra-capitalistic world. Then you have a second film, which is called Money Time. So Money Time, we are in a completely dehumanized world where there are only machines, and there is a sort of let's say, like this machine, let's try to reach the space where something that we don't know. And then we have My Generation, which is a portrait of the 2020s. And 2020s are a world which is, let's say, which we can identify with new dictatorships, and also a terrorism of thinking compared to what was before. And so what the film wants to say is that today we are every mind is exposed to a continuous flux of informations that comes through screens, whether it's an iPhone, a TV, or a big screen in Times Square or Piccadilly or whatever. So how we can materialize this information? By creating 7 different words which address an important theme of the society. So the film began with a research on which are the most Google themes in today. And we found out there were sex, religion, politics, art, finance, sports. And we built 7 different cities that display all of these themes. And we move on from one to the other. And the connection between them is an highway. So the idea was
on which we are moving backwards.
Exactly, backwards. Why backwards? Because at the end of the film, we understand that all the people are moving in one direction, apart from the driver, which drives backwards. But actually, she's the one who's driving in the right direction. The other ones are driving in the wrong direction.
Guys,
So,
you just have to see it. It's just remarkable. I mean, I really hope you take the time to sit down and watch all these films. Federico, I'm sorry to cut you short, but we actually have taken up a full half an hour. I had no idea it would take that long, but I just have enjoyed this so much. I really have. Thank you all for coming. I hate to rush you away, but you've been patient as it is. Watch the other films. You'll see you're in good company.
okay, thank you.
See you.